Today we'll talk about why you shouldn't be learning a language like a child. Before we start the video, I'd rather put some disclaimers out here, just in case. So, I am not claiming that I know everything about language learning. Spoiler alert, no one does. So in this video, I will start with outlining the differences between adults and children in terms of language learning, and then we'll have a bit of discussion. So let's start with the first difference. Adults have a lot of life experience and they usually use context to learn and understand language. So for example, if you're reading a book and there is a word you do not understand, even in your native language, you can often guess the meaning or have, an idea of what the word is about. That's roughly what you call context, being able to guess things based on what's happening around, I guess. As for children, they don't really have an understanding of context, and they have very little life experience. Adults have usually an academic or intellectual approach to language learning. For example, they learn rules, grammar, exceptions. So basically, they've got an explicit knowledge of the language they're learning. Children, on the other hand, they learn language orally and they don't learn grammar. Instead, they tend to learn patterns which often they will overgeneralize. So for example, they will say things like I fighted, I catched, or I finded. Another difference is that adults learn language only a few hours a day or a week or even a month, while children, they're exposed to the language constantly. Adults learn a foreign language through their native language, and it helps them to learn the grammar. Children, on the other hand, they start from scratch and they have to figure out everything on their own. So they basically have to figure out the concept of pluralization when you make words plural, for example. Adults will more often than not have a foreign accent when they speak their other language. Hehe, that's me. And children usually just have a native accent or a very, very mild accent. Adults, in a similar time of exposure as children, will usually be able to build more complex sentences and have a wider vocabulary, while children use more limited language and use more basic vocabulary. Adults usually learn a language because they want to. Children learn a language because they have to. One interesting point. Adults usually are more self-conscious and are more scared to make mistakes because they don't want to be judged. Children usually, they make mistakes, they just don't give a crap. And they don't have this fear of being judged. And the last point is that adults will generally suffer from interference from their native language. So that's why, for example, a similar group of native speakers of one language will make similar mistakes when they speak the same foreign language. Like French people will say, I have 25 years old, for example. As for children, they don't get any interference from any other language because they are learning their native language. So clearly we can agree that adults are the best and children suck. Obviously, I'm joking, but let's now move on to the discussion. So I think outlining the differences between children and adults kind of helped us to see that you can't really learn like a child if you're an adult. I actually find it quite surprising when companies claim that with their software or book or whatever, you can learn a language like a child, because it's not possible, just by the very fact, for example, that adults have a native language and children don't, and we know that your native language will influence the language you're learning. There are also clear differences in terms of where language is processed in the brain of children and adults. I mean, I'm not a specialist, this is just neurolinguistics, so don't ask me for the details, I don't have them. But most of all, could you imagine if people spoke to you like a child? Would you not feel patronized a little bit? Baby talk or child-directed speech is basically the word used to refer to that kind of way of talking that adults have with children, like, using very simple words, repeating a lot, using a very high-pitched tone in order to help children learn the language, because that's how they learn. Like, you would never see an adult talking to another adult and being like, hello you, how you doing? Hello? Like, that'd be super weird, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I know companies are not claiming that they will teach you a language using child-directed speech, but I thought that was an interesting aspect of language learning in children, which doesn't really occur in adult language learning. I would also like to argue in this video that us adults, we have many advantages over babies in terms of language learning. First of all, we all have a native language which we draw upon to learn a new language. Having a native language means that you can relate concepts or structures of your native language to the new language or the language you're learning. So for example, when I'm teaching my students about politeness in French, language, I use the idea of politeness which is present in any language. Anyone knows how to be polite and how to be rude, in fact. And I use this knowledge to explain how it works in French, but that can be applicable to any other language. And the same goes for conjugation, plurals, or anything like that. So for example, if I was holding an apple in my hand and I would tell you, do you want it? It, you would know, would refer to the apple because you're looking at me and I'm holding an apple and I'm asking you if you want it. So you would assume I'm talking about the apple. As for a child, the child would probably have no idea what I'm talking about in the first place, though they still might reach for the apple if they're hungry. Second, we also learn more quickly than children. For example, children after 3 years of full immersion in the language, when they are 3 years old, they are able to say a few words, maybe use basic sentence structures, but adults after 3 years of exposure to a new language, they will be able to say much more and they will have a fairly good level in the language. Number 3, and I think it's a great advantage for us adults, is that children, they learn mainly language through speech, but adults, we learn through speech, but also through writing, through listening, and through reading, and also many, many other things. As adults, we are lucky enough to have access to a lot of resources to learn languages. Children are just limited to adults talking at them like they're idiots, or hearing stories about how a mole got pooped on the head and she wants to find out who did that. Yep, that's a real story. Anyway, so that's it for today. I hope you found the video useful. If you have any comments, disagreements, anything, just, leave a comment in the comment section below. And if you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. It's free. God, everyone says that. That's not even funny. Anyway, I'll see you later. Bye.